Quick disclosure before we start. AI-assisted tools were used in parts of the research and production workflow. Final editorial judgment, risk posture, and release approval stayed human-led. This is operational guidance, not legal advice. These are my opinions and are not representative of any organization. This is AI Change Desk. Thank you for choosing to tune in. This week did not sound like software. It sounded like infrastructure. Anthropic talked about multi-gigawatt compute. Microsoft talked about national scale investment in workforce training. And Anthropic came back the next day with a defensive security coalition because, apparently, one normal press release was not enough for 1 week. And yes, I know national capacity check sounds like the kind of phrase that should come with a conference badge and a mediocre breakfast buffet. But the operator point is real. If the serious players are organizing compute, security, and skills together, then the rest of us need to stop pretending AI is just another software category we can evaluate one feature page at a time. Last episode was about retained artifacts. What stays? What gets reused? Who owns the aftermath? This week is the layer underneath that, because once AI work starts to matter operationally, the next question is not just what the artifact does, it is whether the surrounding system has the capacity, the defensive posture, and the trained humans to support it. That is the real pattern across this week. Start with Anthropic. On April 6th, Anthropic said it is expanding its partnership with Google Cloud and Broadcom to secure multiple gigawatts of additional TPU capacity starting in 2027. That is not a feature announcement. That is a statement about who expects to have enough infrastructure to keep competing at the top end of the model market. And when a company starts talking in multi-gigawatt terms, the implication is not subtle. Capacity is no longer background plumbing. Capacity is strategy. Then, Anthropic came back on April 7th with Project Glasswing. That is a defensive cybersecurity initiative with more than 40 organizations involved, up to $100 million in credits over 5 years, and access to a non-public cyber defense model alongside its Claude Gov work. Again, not really a feature story. This is what it looks like when frontier AI companies start acting more like infrastructure actors with a security layer, not just model vendors with a roadmap. And then there is Microsoft. On April 3rd, Microsoft said it will invest $10 billion over the next 2 years in AI and cloud infrastructure in Japan, expand cybersecurity collaboration, and help train 1 million people by 2030. 2 days earlier, Microsoft announced a similar pattern in Singapore. Another $5.5 billion for cloud and AI infrastructure, an upskilling goal for 100,000 people, and free access to Microsoft 365 Copilot chat for all tertiary students. That is the part I do not think people should miss. These are not isolated product launches. They are combined capacity and skills moves. So if you put the week together, the pattern gets pretty hard to ignore. Compute, defense, and training are starting to move as one board. And look, this is the point where a normal person would prefer the story to become simpler. It does not become simpler, because once you see the board this way, you start realizing that provider choice is not just a tooling choice anymore. It is a dependency choice. It is a training choice, and a little uncomfortably, it is starting to look like a location choice too. If one region is getting the infrastructure, the cybersecurity coordination, and the skills pipeline earlier than another region, that matters. It matters for hiring, it matters for partnerships, it matters for universities, and it definitely matters for smaller teams that like to tell themselves they are staying vendor neutral while quietly building half their workflow on somebody else's stack. Which, to be fair, is a very normal thing to do. It is also the kind of thing that only feels neutral right up until the market starts hardening around a few providers with very different advantages. Why does this matter to operators? Because most teams are still evaluating AI one tool at a time. Can this model summarize better? Can this assistant draft faster? Can this pilot fit into budget? Those are still valid questions. They are just not the whole set anymore. The deeper questions now are, which providers are gaining structural capacity? Which ecosystems are building defensive coordination around their models? Which countries, universities, and labor markets are getting earlier access to skills and tooling? And what does that mean for your own dependency map 2 quarters from now? And here is one more practical way to think about it. Imagine a support team, or a research team, or even a university program choosing where to build its day-to-day habits. They are not just choosing a model,
They are choosing an ecosystem.
Where the training materials will come from, where the security guidance will come from, where the integrations will get better first, and where the people they want to hire are more likely to already have working fluency. That is why these announcements matter beyond headline size. They start shaping the default environment people learn inside. This is where teams get this wrong, usually in three ways. First, they read infrastructure news like investor theater. That is a mistake. You do not need to be training frontier models yourself for these moves to matter. You just need to be dependent on the vendors, clouds, and training pipelines that will feel the downstream effects. Second, teams separate skills from operations. They treat workforce training like human resources, security coordination like the security team's job, and vendor capacity like procurement. Maybe on paper that division looks tidy. In practice, it means nobody owns the combined picture. Third, they confuse access with readiness. Availability is not preparedness. Free access to Copilot chat for students matters. It is not the same thing as durable fluency. More capacity at the frontier matters. It is not the same thing as resilience for every organization downstream. And this is the part where I sound like the least fun person in the meeting. But somebody has to say it. The hidden trade-off is concentration. The same moves that make AI more available can also make dependence on a small number of providers more structural. A bigger compute deal can improve capability and supply confidence. It can also make the market feel even more centered on a narrow set of actors. A defensive security coalition can improve resilience for the organizations inside the circle. It can also widen the gap between those getting early defensive support and everyone else trying to reverse engineer best practice from the outside. National training pushes can widen access. They can also make it clearer which regions are building a talent flywheel sooner than others. And if you want the mildly annoying version of the truth, it is this. Once AI starts behaving like capacity, the organizations with the best position are not always the ones with the best prompt library. Sometimes they are just the ones closer to the infrastructure, closer to the training pipeline, and closer to the security feedback loop, which is much less glamorous. It is also much more operationally useful. So what would I decide by Friday? I would run one capacity sweep, 5 moves. 1. Name your top 2 AI provider dependencies. 2. Identify one workflow where provider concentration is now a real operating risk. 3. Ask security whether you have a named path for external AI safety or cyber intake. 4. Ask where AI training is actually happening, not where it is supposedly available. And 5. Write down one assumption your team is making about future AI access that you have not really tested. Then do one more thing. Pick one sentence you have been saying too casually. Something like, we can always switch later, or the models are mostly interchangeable, or training will catch up once the tools settle down. Maybe one of those is true for you. Maybe. But this is the right week to stop treating those like harmless background assumptions and start treating them like operating bets. Because once compute, defense, and skills start moving together, the cost of being vague goes up pretty quickly. Because half the value of a week like this is discovering which assumptions had quietly become infrastructure assumptions without anybody formally naming them. That is the real question for this week. If AI is starting to be organized like critical capacity, is your organization still managing it like optional software? This is AI Change Desk. See you next time.